The Christmas season, a wonderful time of cheerfulness and joy, fellowship and friends to be had of all kinds. What a great opportunity to share with you a merry and wonderful deck tech we have for you tonight. Too bad you're not getting any of that. This is Chaos Extermination, a Precon Mash-up brought to you by the MTG Thoughtcast. My name is John, and we've got ourselves a Grixis pile of misery, chaos, extermination, and burning it all to the ground this wonderful holiday season. Today's mashup is going to be combining two Universes Beyond Grixis decks into one pile together. As it is tradition with the Precon mashup here, we are combining two Precons together, no other outside assistance of cards, and making one cohesive strategy that you can build this holiday season to make your friends miserable. The decks in question that we are combining today is going to be the Ruinous Powers from the Warhammer 40k decks and the Masters of Evil from the Doctor Who. When putting these together, we do end up with a variety of commanders that we could have at the helm, but we have decided to go ahead and play this deck as Abaddon the Despoiler at the main helm of this deck. Abaddon is 2N Grixis for a 5/5 legendary Astartes warrior, trample, and during your turn, each spell you cast from your hand with mana value X or less have Cascade, where X is the total amount of life your opponents have lost this turn. We're going to stick using Abaddon here because the amount of extra card advantage you can get utilizing Cascade is going to expedite how much of these combat creatures, burn spells, and removal spells that we're able to play over the course of the game. That is not to say one of our other commander options in the deck isn't as viable. We are leaving Davros, Dalek Creator, in the deck as well, and in fact, he actually would be a pretty good tag-in alongside Abaddon, whichever of the two you would prefer to play. Davros is 1N Grixis for a 3/4 legendary artifact creature, Alien Scientist, Menace, and at the beginning of your end step, create a 3/3 Black Dalek artifact creature token with Menace if an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn. Then, each opponent faces a villainous choice to either have you draw a card or they discard a card. As you can see with these two commanders, both of them have a unifying goal that they want to try to do, have an opponent or opponents lose life to benefit what their strategy is looking to do. And that's why this combination is going to come together so well, because both decks are utilized in such a way of making sure opponents are losing life at every opportunity. So taking the pieces together, we can combine them into this pile of using burn spells, removal spells, and combat-based creatures to always make sure our opponents are losing life any turn we have available. Davros' deck definitely more so featured creatures that, especially with Myriad, with the ability to have a single creature, be sending out its attacking power at multiple people at the same time, whereas the Ruinous Powers one just cared about relatively larger, big creatures with some forms of evasion or speed or things of that nature. So taking the two of these together, you can have bigger creatures hitting one per person, and then relatively smaller or medium-sized things with Myriad hitting a person and then going to each other opponent at the same time. This is exemplified by some of the best cards in the deck, like Auton Soldier, a 6-mana alien soldier that you can have enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it isn't legendary, is an artifact in addition to its other types, and has Myriad. This is a clone that allows you to either make a copy of either Abaddon or Davros, or you can have a clone of anything else that anybody else on the battlefield has relevant, or another clone of something that you have as well. Another very good evasive creature that's going to make sure you're getting combat damage in all the time is the Flood of Mars, a 4-mana 3/3 alien zombie horror with Island Walk, and when it attacks, you put a flood counter on another target creature or land. If it's a creature, it becomes a copy of the Flood of Mars, and if it's a land, it becomes an island in addition to its other types. So with this, you can start making your other creatures you control copies of this Island Walker, that then when it also attacks, you could put in a flood counter on somebody else's land. And Island Walk means that as long as they control an island, the creature is unblockable, meaning you've got guaranteed damage from this and any other creatures you have down in play that are copies of it anytime you need it to. We can also make sure that we're hitting multiple people at once with things like Myriad, as described on things like Dalek Squadron, or other creatures that can naturally make themselves unblockable, like Clockwork Droid. While the creatures that came from the Doctor Who deck seem to be more on the combat-focused ones, the ones that came out of the Warhammer side of this are here to help ensure that these creatures are always doing combat damage at all opportunities. So stuff like Blood Crusher of Khorne giving everything trample, or Seeker of Slaanesh that makes it that each opponent must attack with at least one creature each combat if able. That opens up the doors a little bit more for you to be able to get through with some of your threats. But it's not all creature damage that we're going to be relying on as well. We have a variety of assorted other effects that come from either other creatures, instants, sorceries, or enchantments that are going to make sure that we have other means of dealing non-combat damage to our opponents at all opportunities. So some of the villainous choice cards in here, like Ensnared by the Mara, is going to make sure that they are going to be taking damage or giving you extra card advantage, while something else like Exalted Flamer of Tetsunek, I apologize if I mispronounced that, a 4-mana 2/4 demon that at your upkeep returns an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, and when you cast an instant or sorcery, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Things like these that are going to start compounding the damage off of other non-combat related sources always make sure that you can do these potentially in your second main after you've already done combat damage with a creature. These then start gaining Cascade off of Abaddon, or ensure that opponents have lost more than 3 life during a turn if you're playing Davros. Of the spells that we're casting then, if they're not going to be creatures that are going to be dealing combat damage, or burn-related spells that are going to be making sure that our opponents are losing life, we are going to be playing an assortment of destruction spells, again in the same vein as some of the other creatures that make combat easier. These targeted removal and damage-based spells are going to keep the board clear for our combat-related creatures to always have access to get through. So just like a simple little guy like Dalek Drone is exactly what we want in here. A 5-mana 3/3 flying menace, and when it enters, it destroys a target creature an opponent controls, and that player loses 3 life. It clears the way, it puts a body on the field, and it makes sure our opponent loses life for casting it as well. Or we have the capability of removing all kinds of permanents off the battlefield as well, like with a spell called Kill, Maim, and Burn, a 5-mana instant that it lets you choose one or more that you can either destroy an artifact, destroy a creature, or deal 3 damage to a target player. So a similar result. You get a creature out of your way, also remove a stubborn artifact, and an opponent loses life. But then we also have an assortment of other wide damage and shuffling related effects to also take care of threats off the board. Things like Chaos Warp and Delete and Feed the Swarm, and This Is How It Ends. All sorts of effects like these that help clear away the board of anything else that would be blocking our way with the stuff with like Myriad and whatever. And then we start pushing through all of our creatures and burn spells even faster. And as a reminder as well, once you start dealing damage to your opponents, all of this stuff that you're casting, if we have Abaddon at the helm of them, they're going to gain Cascade as well. And Abaddon does check to see the total amount of life that your opponents have lost. So since the curve of this deck kind of really is going between 5 and 7-ish or so, basically once during your main phase and into your combat, if you can get a total life loss amongst your opponents between like 5 to 7 or 8 or something to that degree, most everything in your deck that you cast from your hand is going to gain Cascade. This does mean that we're going to make sure we have a lot of mana acceleration to make sure that we're getting to some of these bigger threats, and especially our commanders as well, considering Abaddon is kind of a backbone piece, I'd say, of how this deck is going to function. It works without him, but it certainly goes at its max potential while he's down in play. So thankfully, between these two precons, we have a very, very nice suite of things like of all the talismans within our particular colors, plus your normal suspect pieces in here like Soul Rings, Arcane Signets, Commander Sphere, and Mind Stone. The Warhammer deck also gives us Dark Ritual, which is fantastic. And the Doctor Who deck also gives Solemn Simulacrum, who acts as obviously a little bit of mana fixing, but then is a very good guy who wants to die and get you a card back into your hand. And since we have talked about this before with one of our previous Doctor Who mashups as well, the combination of the lands that were included in the Doctor Who deck, plus the ones that came inside of the Warhammer one, our mana fixing package is incredibly sweet, especially because of the fact, unlike the last one we were talking about that is adding up a bunch of colors together, this is two Grixis decks coming together to share their collective pile of really, really good lands into a very good package. Of which you obviously have stuff in here like a Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Path of Ancestry, and a Crumbling Necropolis. There's a couple fetches in here, like the Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, but then also a selection of things like the Fiery Islet that can cycle itself away from your battlefield for a card, the Snarl style ones that want you to reveal a land of that type and they come down into play untapped, and also things like the temples for some scrying, which normally is not, like, those are the kind of lands you would cut ahead of time, but because we are doing a Cascade theme, using Abaddon at the helm, the scry is actually a little bit more useful than you would anticipate, because you can set up the top of your library. You could see what you have upcoming and determine, firstly, if that spell is worth cascading into, and secondly, how much damage you need to do during the turn to ensure that you hit that spell if you want to cast it. So, cut out the scry lands if you're interested, but I think for a build like this, they do actually benefit what the strategy is trying to do. And this, my friends, is Chaos Extermination. It, honestly, more so than I ever thought it was going to be, this was a very, very interesting and fun combination to go through. The fact that kind of both of these two decks had a overlaying similar theme while both doing slightly different components and bringing them together to share a unified goal actually ended up being way more synergistic and fun than I thought this was going to be. You're just playing Grixis remove all the things. You've got bird spells, you've got combat related creatures, you have destruction spells, and you're going to be cascading these value pieces on top of each other while actively closing out the game. Your opponents will just not have the available resources to keep up with you as you're going. And if they do start compounding up against you, man, the sweeper package that we have in here between stuff like Blasphemous Act and the Doomsday Confluence and things of that nature, it's just like you're going to just never really be in a situation where no matter what your opponents have down in play is going to be a problem for you. Between the removal and cascade related stuff that these two Grixis decks pull together, you're just going to be an unstoppable force of chaos. I really am looking forward to see who ends up getting these precons and pulling themselves together with this to have themselves a Merry Grixmas. Thank you so much for watching the Precon Mashup. My name is John from the MTG Thoughtcast. Drop a comment down below if you have your own ideas for something we can do as a Precon Mashup, and I hope you all have a wonderful and miserable, chaotic Christmas season. Take care, everybody. Have a good day.